Alright guys, in this video I'm going to be deploying a VM with VMware VCenter, but I'm going to do it with Ansible AWX, and I'm going to get the network information from Netbox, and I am going to put the information about this VM also into Netbox so that I start to build up an inventory whenever I deploy a VM in my lab environment. Now, this playbook, obviously feel free to take it with you into your own environment, but I do warn you that this is all built under lab conditions. Take what you want from the playbook, and you look at the link to the repo in my in the description. But remember, it's a lab environment, so take what you will from this. Hopefully I can help you, inspire you, help you learn, and start using Ansible, or even just as well Ansible AWX. So quickly, prerequisites. I need to make sure you understand the prerequisites. So first, Ansible 2.9 plus. A lot of these modules that are in there, I think 2.8 is okay, but a lot of them are starting to move to the 2.9 Ansible version. So you just be safe. I don't know any reason why you wouldn't go up to 2.9 unless you have old modules that don't support it. But for a lab situation, maybe just run with this. The other one, obviously, it's quite obvious. You need Netbox AWX, and you need VMware VCenter with obviously an ESXi host. You can use the evaluations. That's what I'm using. So you use the evaluations, and you can actually then get a good bit of time to play with these, practice with them. Obviously, you got to tear it down after a while and start a whole new evaluation. But you get to use it. You get to have a see what it's like. I am eventually going to go into doing tests with Azure, and we'll also have a trial account there. But for now, we're going to try. We'll work with the most popular on-prem VMware hypervisor. That's vCenter. So as I said, this is all going to happen through Netbox. Netbox is going to be the way in which it is, and there is a lot of other tools in which manage your IP addressing. People even made their own ones. Then there's the dreaded spreadsheet. That the whole reason for this is to get rid of, or start the idea of getting rid of an IP address spreadsheet. Netbox doesn't instantly replace it, but it's going to set us on the journey, I believe, to replacing it. In my own home lab environment, I have a spreadsheet, and I've been using that for a long time. However, I've been starting now to shift everything to Netbox, and I've started to try and do that with Python or Ansible to learn. I mean, I don't know much about Ansible. I didn't know how to do any of this a week ago. So, as an encouragement to you, reading through this, take a lot of what I've learned, play with it, do as you will with it, and if you know better ways, if you're already further along the Ansible journey, and you know some better ways to do this, please tell me. I'm not professing to be an Ansible guru here, and I would like to hear how I could do this better, and I'm just sharing what I've been learning and how I've been getting there. So again, I'll keep going on. Basically, with Netbox, it's an IPAM or a DCIM. So data center, basically data management, IP management. There's a lot of extra bits, but that's the core of what Netbox is trying to achieve. There's a lot of other things that add, and you can put NAT information, you can put VRF information. You can put all your rack information, get photos of it, you can visually see all the cabling, how it all goes. It's quite amazing. However, the great thing is you can pick and choose that. I mean, obviously I don't have a crazy amount of racks. I don't have VRFs all over the place. I don't have NATs all over the place. It's my home network. I probably have more than, obviously, most other people have in their home network. But I'm not running a data center and that sort of thing. I've kind of made my own pseudo data center. It's very simple. But the power of Netbox is that you don't need to have all these things to do it. And as you'll see in my post, or you'll see when I talk a bit later, there is certain things that I'm doing here, but aren't necessarily needed. You can take some of that and just use one part of the function with Netbox. And I think that's one of the biggest things I found with Netbox, is that it's not an all or nothing kind of idea of solution management. It's you keep adding to and using as much as you want. You keep making it what is called a source of truth. And making something a source of truth within an organization isn't something you can just do overnight. But with a slow and steady movement, say with now deploying VMs and putting that information into Netbox, pulling the IP address from Netbox, you're on your way, you're on that journey. The rest will just start to slowly come as you get more and more time. The business allows you to invest into it and doing more. That's my personal opinion. Please feel free to leave in comments. Tell me how you see it differently. Any ideas you have that anyone else could do it differently. Let's all share and help. And then AWX. AWX is, I said in the last post, is the downstream, the upstream of Tower. So it's the free version, open source version, and a lot of stuff is trialed out there in Ansible AWX before it goes to Ansible Tower, which is the paid commercial one, and with lots of support. AWX still has all the features that Tower has, obviously without the support, as I mentioned. However, AWX allows us to, easily put playbooks in there and have them automatically run. Have what we call the survey, which is what I'll be utilizing in this video and in my blog post. The survey is a great way to let people who know nothing about Ansible, or people who don't have Ansible on their computers, no matter what they are, as long as they can get to their web browser, they can then run these Ansible playbooks. And it helps with maintaining compatibility, because you don't need to worry about Ansible versions, all that sort of stuff. You have it, if it works on the AWX, it will work on that person's computer because they're just launching it from a browser. It also will pull from your Git repo, so there is that idea of managing of your code, so that there's tracking of all the work that's been done, and you can do all your work on the playbook and everything like that. Obviously, then push it to your Git repo. But there's heaps of ways, and you can make projects within Netbox and AWX, and you can link Ansible inventory to Ansible, and you can have the Ansible and Netbox talking, AWX and Netbox talking to each other, which is, I think they're kind of almost built for each other in some ways, I think. And the community that's out there, especially I go onto the Network to Code Slack channel, they're very, very helpful. I don't often ask much. I actually just read and hear what people are saying, and I read different forum posts, but the community out there is very vibrant and very helpful. There's lots of good stuff to read online. There's the Slack channel, as I said. You can see people asking a lot of times similar questions to you, and you might think they're dumb questions, but there's no dumb questions, and there's a lot of guys in there that are really, really helpful. They talk about the things they're going to bring out soon. But anyway, I'm waffling on about how good these products are. What we need to do now is we're going to get started on talking about this whole playbook and why I did certain things and how I got there. And again, feel free to leave any comments, and I do encourage you just to support me, help me get going with this, and believe in that feedback, but also subscribing or liking this video. I really appreciate it if you could do that. I know that's a typical thing you hear in all ones, but it really does make a big difference, so I really appreciate any of that, and especially feedback. I would really appreciate that. So let's get started and talking about this playbook and what it does and how the survey works, and I'll even run you through a bit of an example. Alright guys, before we get right into all of that, all the playbook and all the tasks that are associated with it, I'll just quickly go over, the outline or purpose of the playbook. This is in my blog post. I briefly talk about it, but basically, first step, create a VM entry in Netbox, and then add the respective data. So we assign an interface, and then we assign the IP address to the interface. After that, we'll deploy a VM to VCenter, and with the following configuration, we use template to deploy the VM. The template is, say, it could be CentOS, or it could even be a Ubuntu, or it could even be a Windows one. There's a few different templates that I have. I mean, you could have thousands in your organization. I really hope you don't, but every organization is different. There's good reasons for them over lots of different templates. And then you assign we'll assign an IP address that we get from Netbox that we generated earlier, and that's assigned to that interface. So we'll use that IP address that's used there, because we're going to store that as a variable. And then we'll also put DNS configuration in. That's part of the vars file that I'll go on to talk about real soon. So let's get started looking at some of these playbook tasks now that I've given you sort of that brief outline of what we're trying to achieve with this playbook. Alright, so part of jumping into this playbook, it's easier to follow along and such understand everything if I just give you a bit of a quick outline. So the outline is, at first we're going to make a VM entry in Netbox, then we're going to add the respective data to that entry in Netbox. So the Netbox entry, or the VM that I'm going to make inside of Netbox, is just literally the VM. However, you've got to assign interfaces to it, then those interfaces you can give them IP addresses. So the first step is create that VM, as I just said. The next part is assign an interface, and we'll give it a name, we'll give it a bit of a description as well, and then we'll assign an IP address to that. The IP address is the interesting part, and it's actually the part that really made me want to make this playbook, is because obviously I don't want to be managing an IP address spreadsheet. I want to be doing it dynamically, and I want something else like a database or like Netbox to be doing it. I really loathe having to look after an Excel spreadsheet, and that may be because of the laziness coming through me, but I don't want to do it. I'm serious. So Netbox to the rescue. And Netbox, you can give it a prefix, which a prefix is part, like say a VLAN, or it's a network that you make. It's a prefix, literally the / whatever it is. And so what it will do is it will look at that prefix and what all the address assignments you have in there already, and it will find the next available one for you. And then it will assign that, it will give you that back, and we store that as a variable, and that variable then assigns it to the Netbox VM interface, and it stores a bit of information, what that's doing. I've just made up some random text just for this lab environment. You need to determine what you put in there, what's best for you. And then we're going to deploy a VM. Now, the VM, you might say, oh, that's the most important part, that's what we're doing. Actually, if I'm going to declare Netbox as my source of truth, I can't stress this enough. If you want to make Netbox and to use Netbox properly, it needs to be your source of truth. And that means that the information is more critical than the actual VM, because if it's not in there, it doesn't exist. It needs to exist in Netbox first. Otherwise, it should never exist in VMware VCenter or Azure or AWS, whatever. If you're going to declare it a source of truth, then it needs to be the source of truth. And so, to me, that information comes first. It's my priority. It's not make the VM and then add the Netbox entry. No, I want the VM to only exist once the information is there. I can roll back the information out of Netbox, fine. If the VM fails, we want to delete it sometime later, but it has to live in Netbox, 100%. So the next task here, as I said, deploy the VM to vCenter. And we'll use a template. There's a few different ways in which you could deploy a VM there. You could get boot up straight up into an image and then use Pixie or whatever. I'm using templates for the sake of simplicity. It's really quite easy. I just convert a computer to a template, and then the rest is done. It's quite simple. And then we're going to assign that IP address that I talked about before that we got from Netbox. We're going to assign it, and we're also going to assign DNS. There's a few other things I could do. I could join it to Mac, I could run some PostScripts. There's a whole bunch of things you could do. You could do them with Ansible, you could do them with VMware VCenter and the customization. But I'm only going to just talk about these things because I'm going to keep it small, brief. There's more things we could add, and I encourage you to go look at how you can add those if they're the things you need. They're just basically additional modules or different parameters you need to put there in VMware vCenter, or some tasks you might need to do with AWX once it's built. And because you have that IP address as a variable, you can then make an SSH session to that computer, a VM I should say, once it's finished booting. So there's lots of different things you could do. I'm just presenting the baseline, get you going. Next post, I'm going to talk about error checking, reporting, giving this information back once it's finished. But for this post, we're just going to simply make it. We're going to basically go through that process. We'll add onto it, build onto it next week, and make it even better. So let's get stuck into the actual playbook tasks now. As per the outline above, there's quite a few tasks that need to be done. There's basically variable conditional tasks. They're using set facts, and then Netbox tasks, and then there's vCenter tasks, which I just was talking about then. So let's get stuck with the first one. The first one's a variable conditional task. I want to be clear to start with, because this is something I've read a bit online. There's a bit of friendly discussion about this topic, and set_fact is not a variable, and it is true. It literally is what it is, what it says it is. It's a fact. Facts are different to variables. However, the way I'm using them here, I'm pretty much using it like a variable. So it's helpful just to consider as a variable, just for the sake of this. I could talk to you about why they're different and everything like that, but I encourage you to go spend 15-20 minutes, maybe up to an hour, playing with set facts and normal variables, and what the precedence is, how precedence works with all the different types of variables. There's lots of good information out there. I don't need to repeat that and provide that information. You can go out there and get that yourself. So in summary, these set facts checks, I'm going to call them conditionals because I've got that when clause or parameter at the bottom of them, and they're looking. There's two conditionals here. There's one that looks at the host underscore env variable that I made. That's the host environment. So that's the environment that the host belongs to. Is it production? Is it corporate? Or is it build? And then the other one we got is host underscore template var, which is basically looking at the template that I chose or gave to the survey in the survey. Same with the host env. It's their survey questions, and they're how we make this playbook a little bit more dynamic, and we will do things based on those two different variables. And those are probably the most dynamic part of my AWX survey. And I purposely kept it very simple with only those two because I want to keep you guys able to get started with this. Obviously, make some more conditional statements. Maybe even think about how you'd use roles to do this. But this is a very flat playbook, and it's not getting into all of that kind of really powerful things that Ansible can do. So in the case of these three environments, you'll notice that they actually, inside those conditional statements that they're building the set facts, they're actually pulling those vars actually from the vars file. The reason for that is a lot of this information, because it's environmental information, it's about production, corporate, and build. I'm actually going to use those variables in other playbooks and other new ones that I go on to talk about eventually soon. And so it's helpful to put them into a vars file that I don't need to rewrite them in my code. I'm like I said, I like to be lazy when it comes to all of these things. And if I can only have to do my variables once and just refer to them every other time, yeah, I'm sold. I'm done. I'm going to do that. Ginger 2 templating using roles again is another better way to do this. So I'll just put that out there. But this is simple, so we're sticking with this vars file. And also in this vars file that I've given as an example in my repo, you'll notice it has the username and password. This again is to keep it simple. However, I would encourage that you made a separate vars file and then you encrypt that separate one for the username and password. And if you feel that some of those IP address information is worth encrypting and keeping away from any prying eyes. So 100% look up if you're not using Ansible Vault. You need to do it because you need to start encrypting your files. It's my personal opinion. You might have a few other ways in which you secure passwords. That is how I do it. That's how I've seen a lot of people in the industry secure their username and passwords. But again, that's a personal preference, and what you do in your organization is up to you. So the network environments one, which I've touched on a bit there, you'll notice that there's like this nb underscore prefix, vcenter underscore folder, and particularly host underscore net underscore VLAN. Those two, if I show you here on the, so these, if I go back up in here and I show you those ones, they're basically, that's them all here. So this is setting the environmental vars, and these pull from the vars file, which is this, as I've just been saying. So if you look here, this is the vars file. I've included a bunch of documentation which gives you some information about what these vars are and what they relate to. This might be a bit too wordy, there might be too much there for you, but that's just there to help anyone get started if they're not really familiar. But see, these are all vars that exist in here, and this is the corporate one. So in my own personal one, I actually have all this information obviously filled out that I'll run through with my Ansible AWX, but obviously what I put up there on the repo, it's going to be empty because it'll allow you to fill them all out, and obviously it has information that I don't really want to be sharing, obviously including this information just here. I could pull them out, make that a separate thing, but really I'll just leave it blank for you guys to get started into it. I left some of this here so you can kind of get an idea of some of that information. That's all very minor, especially this one will come up a bit later, but what we're talking about right now when it comes to the environment, it's these. These are all those vars that are referred to over here. So you'll want to do that, edit those all yourself, put your own ones in if you use this, or you remake it, do your own thing, perfectly fine. But they're going to match also on this. So they're looking for the host env variable, and they're matching it when the string is this. Now the string that comes for that is actually done in the survey. So if I go over here and I show you the survey, go look up this one here. This is where my template that I use to do this. If I look at the edit survey over here and we can basically see that there is a var here for what's the workload environment. Now, that's in my situation, I've done very simply corporate build production. It comes back as host end. That then is used here, and as I said, it searches and finds that conditional. When it meets that conditional, if it's a corporate, it'll then grab all those vars over here and then store them all and set them as a fact. Again, it's not a var, but I'm going to keep calling them as vars. So apologize to any of the Ansible purists out there who really hate anyone when they call them a fact, a var instead of a fact. But yeah, these will all get set at that situation. The next one is then looking for template. Again, looking back here at my template, I can go in there and I could see that I'm answering or providing that var through here, host OS image. So there's a bunch of different images that they could choose, and so then that's reflected here. If I had some other ones which said instead of underscore server, they had say UI or anything like that, I would change it and go match on that word, but with a star at the end of it, basically a wildcard. That's what I would do if I was looking to do. I had a bunch of them that all obviously had Ubuntu 19, and I was trying to match Ubuntu 19 for the platform, because that's what this template's all about. It's about setting a Netbox platform, and Netbox platforms, they're kind of just a broad construct. They're not really, you don't really need to use them if you don't want to, but why I'm doing it and why I think that it's very helpful to do it is, one, that you can search and you can have a look at all your devices which have a whatever OS or platform you want to call it. I call them I call the platforms in some sort of OS. I could call it CentOS 8. You could be a bit more broader if you wanted and just say CentOS, or you could say all Red Hat Linux distributions. How you want to organize that, it's entirely yours. The other part to platforms and why they're good, especially with network devices, is Napalm, which is it's a Nornir if you have heard of Nornir, but you haven't heard of Napalm. Napalm's just a Python abstraction layer that sits there, and you can access and do things with network devices. And you can store a lot of that information of the configuration. You can see the configuration there in Netbox of devices where they support Napalm. So it's quite a helpful tool to get right if you have that operating platform there in the operating system, because it'll inform Napalm what drivers to use. But yeah, moving on from there. Yeah, so moving on, what we've got now is just our Netbox tasks. So the Netbox task, as I've already explained, there's 3 of them, and I've actually named them up here to be a little bit helpful for you guys when you're looking at this playbook and you're running it for the first time. So I've just numbered them, and it makes it easier for when I'm referencing them. So Netbox task 1, it is making the virtual machine. Again, we're pulling vars that are set either by the survey or by the vars file. You can see a lot of the information, as I said earlier. I've made a bit of documentation. This tells you what comes from the survey vars or what comes from the vars file. So you can see a lot of these ones here, which are information about the hardware that's on that host. You're going to find that over here using. We're going to record some of that basic information. Again, with Netbox, you don't need to put that information in there, but we're going to put it in anyway for vCenter. So why not put it in here? And you know what? We solved 2 problems. Now we have information in Netbox about it, and if I want to search up for all my hosts that have this size of 40 gigabyte or whatever size they have this kind of amount of memory, I can do a search in that in Netbox. So you don't have to, but I'm going to anyway, and so they're all here. The other thing to remember is that you may or may not have, but some organizations have a bit of a prefix that they like to put in their name. So I could make a new factor, a new variable where I combine the 2. I haven't bothered here because I just want to show that you can easily use two vars together in one of the parameters here in the modules. So feel free to make your own combined var or set fact effectively. But the other important one to remember with Netbox, unless you've got a valid cert on your computer for your Netbox the environment, make sure you put this line in, because otherwise you're going to run into some problems, obviously. Netbox URL, Netbox token, as I showed you, it's in the vars file. The other thing, if you're familiar with Ansible, you'll have this idea of status, or sorry, state. That's this one here. Status actually has to do with Netbox. It will say that the VM is actually active, or it's not. You're just making it, but you're not actually using it yet. You're just making a whole bunch of them. Nothing much else to say there. You got the roles. There's a whole bunch of things there with Netbox, but I'm not really going to go into those. My focus is here about this playbook, but I'd encourage you to go find out more about that with Netbox if you're interested. Again, don't need to use any of these. You could drop a lot of these things out, like tenant, cluster I recommend keeping, and a lot of these you can just drop out if you really don't want to bother setting all that up with Netbox at the moment. Next one is Netbox Task 2. We basically create the interface, as I said earlier. We're going to put that information that we got from the vars and from the survey, we're going to put it into here, and then it's just going to make that interface for us. The next one, very simply, actually I should point out that you want to, obviously for VMs, you're most likely probably going to have them running in an access mode, like untagged. So just make sure you put that in, because you're also going to obviously assign a VLAN to them, which is done in your vars files. So just make sure you do that, otherwise it won't work out too well for you if you want to put a tagging on, or untag on. So you go around to Netbox Task 3, get the new IP address. This is actually the real source of it. This is the beautiful part. This is the part that I really love, and this is the part where we get an IP address. It's crazy how long how long it's taken me to get to this in my own personal journey, but I'm loving it now that I'm here. Anyway, so I have to give it a prefix, obviously, to search from, and basically it gets it from that prefix. And in this situation, depending on the environment, there's actually 3 different types of prefix. It could be a /23, it could be a /24, it even could be a /20. Like build one's a huge one, because I don't actually care. I might build like 100 just for the sake of it, or I might keep a whole heap there. I don't know. Build I don't really care about, and I just decided I'll make it a big one just for the sake of showing the flexibility. I'm never going to need that many IP addresses, of course, in my build. Then I put the DNS name in as well. So obviously it's me lab.local, which is pretty usual in most lab. That's a common name I see. Then you can put a description. It's again one of those things, but everything else here is pretty basic. This is like the source. This is where the magic really happens in getting that IP address. So it's really not that hard to get started, really, is it? When you look how simple that is. That's actually the time it took me to write that bit and put the variables. I'd probably have only made 2 or 3 IP addresses in a normal spreadsheet. Or found them and given them to somebody that needed to know them, or manually put them in on that. So how quick that was. I mean, sure, I didn't know about how to do all this stuff in Ansible and Netbox beforehand. There might have been a couple of hours spent there, but once you know that, you get all that information, time comes back. You start recuperating that, and I'm really excited to keep using this in my own environment now. The next thing is, with the IP address, when you get it back from Netbox, because we're going to register it here, that's basically creating a variable. It's a bit like setting a fact, but it's a variable. So register makes it a standout, or a text output of what happens, or those actions, and Netbox put out that IP address as one of their std out messages. So you'll get that back, and I store it as an IP. The next thing I need to do, because VMware VCenter wants the full subnet bits rather than a mask, so I have to then convert that from /blah to a 255. So the 255, the subnet bit mask, is in my vars, but I want to get just the IP address here. And so basically I strip the /blah at the end of it, and then I make a new file where it has the IP address in it without the prefix at the end of it, or the net mask. So that's simply all that does. That actually took probably the longest time out of this whole playbook, really, was to get that right, because I don't like this thing here called regex. It is so much more difficult than it needs to be. Anyway, I think a lot of people have that same feeling. But anyway, I figured it out. There's actually a really good tool for seeing irregular expressions and try and get what you want, which I used unashamedly, and I'll put the link in the description, and I'll also have it on my blog post. So if you ever struggle with regex, I encourage you to use this tool. It was really handy. And then we're going to move on to the next big thing, which is deploying vCenter VM. This is the vCenter task 1. There's only one thing I'm really doing here, one task that I'm doing here. It's got a lot of parameters, but it's not really that hard to understand. You've got the connection information. Obviously, you don't need valid certs. We want to put this folder because I like to organize the VMs, so that actually will match the environment that I'm putting in. I've got that as a vars file. I like to power it on, give it a host, give it the name in VMware. That's not the host name, that's just the VMware name. And then we have the template, which is another critical part. And then we have the disk information, which a lot of this comes from the survey. And then same with the memory, CPU, cores, that's all done through the survey. So people get to choose that, and I actually make a limited amount of options. I'll show you that shortly when I run through it. You'll see the limited amount of options that I have given to the end user to configure. Up to you. I mean, I did it just for the sake of testing. You could leave it wide open instead of giving a multiple choice. However, we know devs sometimes, or other people, like to choose things way more powerful than they really need, and that's why we often never relinquish this kind of control. However, I've suggested in many different places that you just relinquish a certain amount that's typical that they need, and then they can go and do these tasks on their own, and you're never too worried about it. You're getting the alerts via email whenever they do this task through AWX. You can get email alerts and all that sort of stuff. So you can have some sort of controls or guardrails, so to speak, for users using this. That's one of the powerful things about AWX, and you can limit the amount of control that the person has as well through permissions. Again, I do these ones. It's funny. I don't understand why this isn't often by default, because it really is frustrating when this isn't enabled, from my personal opinion anyway. Sometimes you go, I just need that extra CPU, things are chugging, and I'll schedule a restart or turn off, and I'll properly upgrade it at another time. But I like the ability to quickly increase that as necessary. And sometimes you can make a reactive Python or Ansible script to execute and do that, or give that to your end users through AWX to increase these CPUs based on something's happening, and you just say they need to upgrade that CPU. Well, they can easily do it with the server turned on, sends an alert message, it's recorded, gets updated, Netbox, etc., etc. That's the start of stuff which we can start to do now that we're storing all that information from Netbox. We're actually putting this all into code via Ansible. That's the start. Some of the stuff we start to now get to do. And then we have the network. This one is obviously the critical part of what we're trying to achieve with the VMware vCenter deployment. We're wanting to put network configuration, because as I showed in my last blog post, deploying just the VM and just using DHCP to get an IP address, it's pretty easy, right? Like you can easily get through that. But this part where we've grabbed all the other stuff, whilst it's still easy, it is what takes it the next level. And you want to be going to that next level, and we'll keep going that next level as we're moving through this. But here it is. Here's the whole playbook. We've just gone through it all. I think I've covered everything there. Please feel free to leave in the comments if something wasn't clear. I do apologize for that. I'm not exactly the most experienced at teaching this. It's all new for me as well. So please leave any comments. Please also, as I said earlier, leave comments where you think I could have done better. But enjoy the run through now of this AWX playbook and how it works. And yeah, as I said, please leave some comments at the end. Thanks.